Hey guys, it's a modeled lead and steel. On the docket today is destructive impact testing between the Eotech and the LP-1. Stay tuned. So on the tabletop today, we have the Promethean LP-1 red dot and the Eotech EXPS 2.0. Now, both of these optics went through a battery of destructive testing. There are some conclusions that we can draw as the manufacturer of the LP-1, but by no means am I saying that you should draw the same conclusions. This is purely anecdotal, and these are, single examples only. So let's get started. The LP-1, as you may know, was designed and manufactured to withstand some of the harshest abuses in impact testing regimen. Now, when it comes to impact testing and destructive testing for optics, it can very quickly go into some of the more asinine and absurd tests. When it comes to optics manufacturing, generally speaking, you don't want to really worry about some of the super extreme testing parameters, because most of the time your average consumer is not going to be throwing their optic out of a helicopter, right? Working it around barriers and hitting door frames with it. Maybe they'll be dropping accidentally their rifle on the ground, or potentially kicking it around in a way that's not terribly abusive to the system. And most of your traditional duty grade optics hold up to that kind of abuse just fine. The Eotech obviously is included. Now, we chose the Eotech for this round of comparisons because I personally love the Eotech. I've owned several Eotechs for quite a number of years, and I think this is an excellent starting benchmark for minimum reliability qualification if you're going to introduce a duty grade red dot. Namely because the Eotech has been time tested, right? This thing has been to every continent out there and has served our armed forces for decades. And so it's a very durable optic. The LP-1 is not just as durable as the Eotech, it actually surpasses it. And that's really saying something, because again, that bar is so high. We started off with taking a look at the Eotech, and specifically the square hood here. And as you'll note in the introductory video, we didn't want these stress-prone 90-degree angles because, as you might surmise, you can very quickly and easily destroy an Eotech with just the right impact at one of these corners. We obviously rounded the hood on the LP-1, as you can see, and that's made for more of those distributed loads. Now, if you were to take an Eotech and drop it at the pinpoint center of the hood, directly at the top of the optic, yes, this central deflection of the 6000 series hood would fare better for optic testing, but you have to ask yourself, what's more common, right? What are you going to be doing with your rifle, and what are the kinds of impacts that your optic might be taking as a result? Are you going to have a perfectly centered drop of the rifle directly on top of the optic, or will it be experiencing some more distributed impacts along the body of the optic, particularly the corners, the sides, and that sort of stuff? And so, as manufacturers, we had to make sure that we had a design that checked as many boxes as possible, because we didn't want to just solve for one particular problem that was, that wasn't really that frequent, frankly. What was more frequent, and as you can see by some of the impact marks here, are the corner drops and the sides, and not the most perfectly centered 12 o'clock impacts. So when we began our final phase destructive testing on the LP-1, we did it with a rifle attached. Obviously, we weren't doing basic drop tests with just the optic. That doesn't really give us any results. And we started with gravel. Gravel is a good material to do destructive testing on because it offers a really good balance between traditional, more impact absorbent dirt, grass, etc. It strikes the balance between that and, of course, concrete testing, which is very, very unforgiving on a system. Gravel is obviously not something that I would want to subject any of my optics to, but we needed to make sure that the LP-1 could survive gravel testing and rifle impacts over and over again without doing anything to shift the zero, crack the glass, or any of that stuff. Now, I'm happy to report that the LP-1, of course, passed all of those gravel drop tests, and that's to be expected with the way we constructed it. Obviously, that 6000 series hood is a little weaker, or intentionally weaker, than the 7000 series body, because it offers us a little more deflection and a little more impact resistance as it deforms and absorbs that kinetic energy. And you, as the operator, should know that if your rifle takes a big impact, and secondarily your optic does too, and you see a little bit of deflection on that hood, be a little more proactive about replacing that hood. It's user serviceable for a reason, and the replacement hoods are very affordable. And so if you're expecting your LP-1 to take another subsequent large impact, make sure that hood is in good shape. And after the LP-1 passed the gravel testing, we decided to clear out the gravel so we just had dry earth underneath. We placed an AR500 steel plate there, and we continued the test with the same LP-1 on top of the same carbine and dropping it, optic down right on that AR500 steel plate. Happy to report that even with the hood fully collapsed after the gravel testing, the LP-1 passed with flying colors on that steel plate. So after probably some of the most extreme conditions you can put your optic through and some of the most absurd impact testing and confirming that the optic held 0 and all that jazz, we decided to step it up a notch and go with concrete rifle testing. So we decided to purchase a brand new Eotech, and we felt that it was fair to use a brand new LP-1. We put them both on the same rifle and we began the drops on concrete. So starting with the Eotech, we placed it on top of the carbine, flipped the carbine upside down, and dropped the rifle directly onto concrete. I did the best that I could to make sure that we were putting an impact on the Eotech that was 12 o'clock, right on the top of the hood where it would have the best chance of surviving. Sadly, after one impact on that carbine, the objective and ocular lens of the Eotech shattered, as you can see, and did so in a pretty spectacular way. Now, we see some arguments for the holographic weapon sight as an excellent option, especially if your glass cracks, because, hypothetically the hologram could still be there. You could look through the optic and still see it. That's fine and dandy until you break one of the several reflectors sitting inside the housing. And as you can see with this particular unit, we have a fully powered Sierra 123A in there, and you can only see the laser at the very edge. It's certainly not usable after just one impact. And again, this is the Eotech, right? This is a very durable optic, and the destructive testing regimen that we put through it was absurd, extreme, and not really practical for what the average end user would be using the optic for. And as our research and engineering shows, these 90-degree angles are the most stress-prone. Although the optic was dropped as flat as it could be on the top, there was still a little bit of deflection on the corner of the hood there. You can see how the corner collapsed first and then immediately contacted the polymer housing and translated all of the force to the glass. This is the kind of drop that you should expect if you're going to be throwing your rifle around. And that's one of the lessons that we learned from this example, is that ultimately your glass is the most pressure sensitive aspect of the optic and the limiting variable. So, what are you doing with your optic design to move and redirect some of that kinetic energy away from the glass? It's very hard to get a perfect pinpoint topside impact. And so ultimately this is the kind of parameter that we had to design for when it came to impact resistance of the LP-1. So to confirm our engineering, we did the exact same test with a brand new LP-1. Stuck it on top of the same carbine, flipped it upside down, and dropped it from the same height directly onto concrete. The optic took 5 consecutive impacts as compared to Eotech's singular impact before we finally had a crack in the ocular lens. The objective is still fine, the reticle still powers on just fine and works absolutely perfectly, and on top of that, the optic maintains 0. Impact, impact, impact. Yeah, dude, we're still on. So what happened? Well, the more probable impact approach is what occurred. You can see some of these corners got dinged up pretty bad, but nothing really on the top of the optic as bad as what we saw with the Eotech. The shroud did its job, right? The 6000 series is great for this role because it deflects enough to absorb some kinetic energy before translating that force to the softer and more stress-prone housing. However, enough impact will deflect the hood enough so that it bows and then impacts the housing, thus translating all that kinetic energy directly to the glass, which is what we saw here. And we also cracked the Ultim polymer that sits in front of the objective. Keep in mind, we were trying our absolute hardest to make this a flat topside fall to, give the advantage to the Eotech as much as possible, and we still had to impact the optic and fully collapse the hood before we finally had enough kinetic energy to crack the ocular lens. So what are the conclusions that we're drawing from this? Well, obviously, engineering and finite element analysis is not going to lie to us. These rounded edges are a little more superior than these more stress-prone 90-degree angles of the Eotech when it comes to the more predicted impact testing or impacts that you may have as an end user purchasing a duty-grade optic. And again, this is just a test unit of one Eotech, and the Eotech itself is a brilliant optic that is extremely durable. It should not be used as a knock on Eotech by any chance, and I can't stress that enough. I know I've said it a million times, but I don't want to come off as a broken record here. The Eotech is a damn fine optic. So yeah, guys, that pretty much sums it up for the impact testing. We wanted to get this video out because, naturally, some people were a little hesitant about the LP-1, provided we are a newcomer to the space, and they wanted to see some of the homework that we did before we brought it out. Stay tuned. We have some more videos coming. That same unit that we did a lot of the gravel experimentation to, we also did thermal testing on. So we went down to negative 50 degrees Fahrenheit, then up to 200 degrees Fahrenheit with a heat gun, and only saw about a 3 MOA thermal drift, which is pretty damn awesome. If you have any suggestions as to what you want us to do to the LP-1, please drop them in. We'll definitely take them into consideration. We also have some submersion testing that we're doing, among other things. But yeah, man, this optic is pretty kick-ass. And I will say, again, the Eotech is a fantastic optic. This is just a single example, and it's purely anecdotal here. We just wanted to show you guys the data that we had to show that the LP-1 significantly outperformed the Eotech with this battery of testing, and we hope you enjoyed the video. So thanks so much for watching.